Well, hi, Preston. It's so good to see you. I'm so happy that you and I could meet today. You know that as part of Historic Vienna, we consider the history of what has happened in our community to be very, very important. You and your family have been um, instrumental as change agents in our community for many, many years. So I thought today we could take a little trip back and you could tell us some of the things that you remember, starting with perhaps when you were young, uh, as you were growing up. Is there, are there any incidences or experiences that you'd like to mention?
Well, for the most part, uh, when I was growing up, it was a happy childhood for the most part because
Mhm.
Vienna at that time was, it was a real small town, and everybody knew it. My parents knew everybody. There were, as I recall, there were four businesses in the town. One was Hawthorne's Furniture, Hawthorne's Pharmacy. One was Wright and Hunt Variety Store, Beck's gas station, and a Pick and Pay.
Mhm.
And those were basically the only stores. And for the most part, the community was probably integrated as much then as it was in the 60s or 70s, as far as neighborhoods were concerned and where people, as far as people were concerned. Everybody kind of knew each other and they kind of depended on each other. And it was a fairly nice community.
Mhm.
And for the most part, I had a happy childhood. And as your childhood progresses and you go to school, then you start noticing differences.
Yes.
And like I say, the neighborhood where I grew up is Sutton and Courthouse. We had white neighbors, and we played with them as children up until we got to be like preteens.
Okay.
And then the parents the daughters weren't allowed to play with us, but we could still play with the boys. And our neighborhood was integrated. Probably two houses down on the other side were two white ladies, elderly ladies, that the Follings, and further down the road was another white family. And so everybody worked together with our little farm community at that time. And everybody knew everybody, and it was a fairly tight little community. I had a fairly good, happy childhood.
Well, that's a good thing. Could you tell me something about your high school experience, especially the time when you were trying to be part of the basketball team?
Well, what had happened was in 1960, when they filed the civil suit, some of the Black kids had gone to school, started school in September.
Mhm.
And our case didn't come up until like October. So I started Madison in October. And prior to that, I knew a lot of students at different high schools because there was a junior human relations council. And when I went to Madison, I wasn't allowed to participate in sports. And through the Junior Human Relations Council, we had representatives from a number of high schools. It was formed in 1960, and it was like 22 students at first from different Mount Vernon, Fairfax, Falls Church High, white and Black students, and we signed a petition. At first, they wouldn't allow us to participate in. Well, let me back up.
Okay.
In 1960, one of the students, Black students, Rayfield Barber, who started at Groveton High School in September, he was allowed to play junior varsity football for a game or two. And then the school board decided that they weren't going to have integrated sports in the schools. And when I went there in October, I wasn't allowed to participate in any sports, but I could participate in intramurals. And so we had a petition signed by probably over 2,000 students, and we presented it to the Board of Supervised School Board. And in the spring of '61, I was allowed to participate in track at Madison. That was, in the spring of '61, I was allowed to participate in track. I participated in track at that time at Madison.
I see. Well, I was looking at an article that was published in November of 1960, and the headline says, "Basketball star is kept off his school team." And this is the article. And there is your picture right there. And I was referencing that. So was it that you did try to be on the basketball team?
I went out for the basketball team, and I was told that I couldn't participate. Mm-hmm. But I could participate in intramurals, and yes, I participated in had to take gym classes, so I was participating with white kids anyway. So I didn't see what the big deal was, but I have that article. Yeah. Yes. And let me clarify a little bit.
Okay.
I wasn't a basketball star. I don't know how that got in there, but I had that article, and I say, well, they messed it up then, and it's still messed up.
Okay. So it wasn't exactly accurate then, as far as the sport that you, okay. Right. But the other person that you mentioned, the one who had previously been on the team or played sports, I assume that he was African American. Is that correct?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And whatever happened to him?
We're still friends. He's living in Chicago right now. He's retired, and he's living in Chicago.
Okay, but did the same thing apply to him, that after that he was unable, or was he able to continue in sports?
Now, the school board ruled that at that point, they ruled that we could. He participated up to that point. It was probably, he probably played 3 or 4 games for Groveton on the JV, and once the ruling was made by the school board, that cut that out.
Okay. All right. Well, at least he got his foot in the door. And sometimes you have to do that, even though you may not go all the way through. You're bringing it to people's attention.
Exactly.
Is there anything else about your high school experience that stands out in your memory?
Well, I participated in track that spring. That was my junior year, and I was the first African American to participate in athletics at the state level, and probably because I went to the state Virginia High School League track meet. Okay. And I got a 3rd place in the broad jump, long jump now, but wow. I got a 3rd place then. And subsequently, the following year, I won the state title.
All right.
And during my high school years, I participated in track. And in my senior year, I was outstanding trackman in Fairfax County at that time. But I participated in like 4 events. I was broad jump, high jump, 100 and 200. And I won that trophy, and I played football. I played football the following fall in 61, and we were pretty successful in football and had a nice little career in Madison. And for the most part, my high school experience was relatively easy. Didn't have much of a social life, but well, the first year, my sister and I were the only two Blacks in Madison. And then my senior year, there were about 5 of us. And I don't know if you remember Ms. Henderson, who was a school teacher and lived in Vienna, lived up the street from you.
Well, I was not living in Vienna during those times. I came in 1967.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't grow up in Vienna.
Yeah, so for the most part, you know, my high school, like I say, didn't have much social life. For the most part, the kids kind of accepted you. Some of the things that happened was like they had to, all the teachers didn't want to teach a Black kid. Okay. So the teachers were selected, or they volunteered to teach us. Everybody didn't want to do it. So you kind of at that time, you know, there was, you kind of knew that you were being discriminated against, but what's new? So that was just part of the life's experience for Black kids at that time.
Correct. Yes. Well, that's interesting what you just said about the teachers could decide whether or not they wanted to teach Black students or not.
Well, you probably don't remember, but prior to that, probably in 1960, you know, they closed the schools in Prince Edward County down in Virginia.
I am aware of that. Uh-huh.
And we had, we invited through the Human Relations Council and some other organizations. We had 5 of the students from Prince Edward to come up here. They stayed with some families during that period of time because they closed the whole school system. And then for the white kids, they had private institution or private academies, but the Black kids were just out of luck. So they were kind of scattered throughout Virginia, throughout different places with family and things to continue their education.
Yes, I am aware of that. I taught in Maryland before I moved to Vienna. And I met some of those teachers that you're referring to because they transferred to the high school that I was teaching at that time. This is before I became a resident of Vienna. Yes. Wow. Well, I'd like to go on to another area. You mentioned an area where you were first in your high school experience. And I know that you were also first as being a police captain in Fairfax County. And could you tell us about that?
Well, in 1982, I was promoted to corporal. And in 1985, I was promoted to second lieutenant. Was a sergeant at that time, but the rank changed probably a year later, and they made up second lieutenants. And I was in charge of personnel. I was a second lieutenant in charge of personnel. I was in charge of, like, they did the polygraph and hiring of new recruits. I did that for a couple, 3 years. And in 1989, I was promoted to first lieutenant, and they transferred me to Mount Vernon Station. And I worked there for what they had two first lieutenants because that was one of the larger stations. Mount Vernon and Annandale were the two largest stations in the county. So they had two first lieutenants, and we split daytime work and evening shifts. And so I worked there a year or so prior to becoming the commander at Mount Vernon. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, you know, most of the officers knew me by then, and I knew a lot of them from different experiences because I had been on the SWAT team prior to that, and so I was fairly well accepted. Except, you know, there's always people that are going to have disparaging things to say, and still, Fairfax County at that time was still pretty. It was still the South. I mean, you know, Fairfax County government and Fairfax County residents and the government, they considered themselves first class and everything, but it was the South, and they still had the plantation mentality because, you know, when they first got the first Black supervisor, they went to Richmond to get him. The first Black police officer was recruited from Richmond, as if other Blacks hadn't applied for the job, but Fairfax County just wasn't. They had to have someone they were fairly comfortable with. I'll put it that way.
I see. And so, what year was this? Like 95-ish?
No, it was. I got promoted to captain in probably 1990.
90.
And
Okay.
90, yeah. It was probably like 90. No, I got promoted to first lieutenant in 90. It was probably like 92 that I was at the. I'm trying to get it straight. I think I was first promoted when I first made captain. I was in charge of the helicopter unit. And from the helicopter unit, I went to Mount Vernon. And then from Mount Vernon, because I was living in Sterling at the time, and they asked us, well, what station would you prefer to go to? So I wanted to go to someplace closer to work. I preferred Mount Vernon because there's a lot of action, but I just didn't like to drive. So from there, I went to Fair Oak Station in Chantilly.
Well, how do you feel when you were a commander that the men under you respected you? What was your relationship in that regard as their leader?
For the most part, I think they respected me because I always tried to be fair. It didn't matter who it was. Mm-hmm. And I made some decisions that weren't very popular, but they were the right decisions to make, and they were the fair decisions to make. So I can live with it, and they learned to live with it. So
yes,
as commander of the station, I mean, you know, that's one of the, at least you have control of people, and your supervisors didn't mess with you except for administrative type things. So they let me make decisions, and for the most part, they were respected. But there's always somebody that, and you know, we went through some cycles where they had we changed chiefs, and promotions for Blacks wasn't the greatest thing. It wasn't happening very often, and we weren't even getting a large number of Blacks in the department. So because we go out when they were recruiting, we go out and recruit in areas a lot of times where there weren't a lot of Blacks, and so they were just trying to. In '85, from '85 on to probably '95, Fairfax County was growing, and the police department was growing, and they were trying to get bodies then.
I see. Well, do you see any improvement from how hiring practices were done then and now, or during the remainder of time that you were in the police department?
Well, it didn't improve while I was there. What we saw was the fact that women were promoted. And at that time, there weren't any Black women that were in positions because we only had a few. And they weren't in positions to be promoted. Uh, I don't think I left in 2004, and I don't think there was a Black female officer in terms of being a sergeant or above at that time. And when I left, we had fewer Blacks in management positions than we had probably 5, 6, 7 years prior to that. We made our biggest growth for Blacks was between the late 80s to the mid 90s. And then it kind of stopped, and women became seemed like the object of promotions. Then more women, when I left, more women were promoted to management type positions than men, especially Black men.
Yes. Well, just overall, do you see now more African Americans involved in law enforcement in Fairfax County than when in 2004 when you left?
I'll be quite honest with you. I never felt really, you know how some people say, well, the police department was your family. Police department was my job.
Okay.
And so I haven't been involved in the police department for a number of years now. And the last chief, Ed Rossler, I'll tell you a little story. Ed Rossler, when he first got promoted to sergeant, I was the commander at Mount Vernon, and he was a bright guy, and but they had put him on a squad with a female lieutenant who was really aggressive and wouldn't let him learn. He didn't give him many assignments. Didn't let him do a lot because she was new at it and she was trying to prove that women could handle the job. So I ended up having to take Ed off of her squad and put a more seasoned sergeant from another squad, transferred him, and that gave him more exposure to learn the job as opposed to being dominated by this woman. So little things like that you just had to deal with. So you just made it, you made the decision. And later on, I knew Ed was going to be good because he was really intelligent. And I think he just retired.
Was he African American?
No, he was white. He was a white guy.
Okay. Well, does the name Lawrence Bast ring a bell?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell us about Lawrence, your friendship and your entrance into the Moose Lodge.
Okay. Lawrence Bast was my neighbor. He moved into the neighborhood. He was a plumber. And he moved into the neighborhood and he would come by. He did some plumbing work for me. He did some plumbing work for my mom. And he would come by on the Sunday and watch a game and drink a beer or something like that. And initially, I didn't know he was involved in the Moose Lodge, but eventually he asked me to say, well, listen, he told me, listen, I've been discussing with some of the members at the Moose Lodge, we need to integrate the Moose Lodge. And I said, man, I don't know anything about the Moose Lodge except that it's only about 3/8 of a mile from my house. I could walk to it in 5 minutes. And I said, well, I don't know that much about the Moose Lodge, except that my last experience at the Moose Lodge, it was a break-in and I caught a burglar, but that was my only experience with the Moose Lodge prior to that. So he asked me to say, well, I'd like for you to join. And I said, okay, I don't have a problem with that. And he took me down for the initial, they show you a film and it explains about the Moose Lodge and Moose Heart and the charitable organizations they sponsor and all that. But basically the Moose Lodge is a social event where they basically just drink and have fun. And they sponsored some things, not that they didn't do some charitable work and donate money to organizations, but basically it was just drinking and having fun when I was there. So I, the first time when they had a meeting to vote on whether I should become a member, they had marbles. They had white marbles and they had a black marble. If you had 3 black marbles that were in the lot, you were rejected. Well, I was rejected twice. And then and Lawrence Bast, he got beat up as a result. They beat some of the lodge members beat him for trying to have me admitted to the lodge.
Really?
But he didn't give up. And I say, well, since you paid this price, we're gonna finish this. So he called the national office. And from there, the national office said, well, you're gonna be a member. So they had a third vote. And it was some FBI agents that were members of the Moose Lodge. And they kind of moved out and kind of, not that they had quit the lodge, but they didn't want to be involved with this problem, being first black, having the black and not being accepted in the Moose Lodge in Virginia. So they kind of backed out. They didn't quit, but they just not participating in the meetings and things. And until the national organization got involved in it, and I was admitted at that time. Usually it takes 3 months, something like 3 months or 6 months, 3 months for you to go back to be accepted as a member. But after that second vote, probably 3 weeks later, I was voted in. So that's how that happened.
So what was it like for you to be in a group where not everyone wanted you? How did you feel going in as a member? Well,
I knew Lawrence and I knew some of the other guys, and that some of the guys I had gone to high school with. So I knew that I wasn't going to be socializing and drinking with them for the most part. So it was just a matter of, I joined it, and I have not been really active in it. I've been to, well, I don't know if you realize or not, but Luther Jackson Alumni Association for the last 2 or 3 years have had their alumni dance at the Moose Lodge in Vienna. And Brenda Haight did ask me to get involved since she knew I was still a member, and I had to talk to him. And because they had a new manager and he was kind of giving them a hard time, but it worked out.
Well, are you still affiliated?
I'm not active. I'm not active as a member. They have a Moose Lodge here in Culpeper. I've been in it for, I didn't go to a meeting, but they used to have Weight Watchers in that, so I used to go there. But no, I'm not an active Moose member. I'm still a member of the Moose Lodge. I support Moose Heart and some of the charities, but that's the extent of my activity with them.
I did see that they are involved in civic work and in charitable work. They have certain projects that they are faithful in doing.
Yeah, they have. And they have a school, and if you're a member and a retiree, they have a senior citizen home that out in I think Nebraska that you can go. And if your members or something happened to a member and they have young kids or something, there's a school they have out there where the kids can go to school and they kind of take care of them. Yeah, they have a lot of charitable things that they do in the community.
Well, I think that's good, and I applaud them for that. Do you have any friends from that lodge who are still friends on a personal level?
No.
And what about Lawrence? Did you say he passed, or is he still living?
I really don't know. I haven't caught up with Lawrence. I haven't talked to Lawrence in years.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I assume that he's still living. I don't know.
All right. Well, I know that your family is well known in Fairfax County. Your mother, in particular, Lillian Blackwell, really made her mark here in the Vienna and Oakton area. And I just wondered if you were involved with her as a young person doing her work with the NAACP, or um, as she worked with uh, Loudoun County, or Louise Archer, or member of the Human Relations Council. I know she was part of something called Horizons Day Camp.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there
Well,
anything that you remember about any of those areas of her life?
yeah. Well, my mother was involved with, like I said, like you mentioned, the NAACP. She was active in that. She was active in the Human Relations Council, and she encouraged us to get involved with when they had a uh, Human Relations Council. I was involved in that. I was the treasurer at one time, and the young man I mentioned before, Rayfield Barber, he was the president. And we did fix ups. We went and did charitable work in the neighborhood, fix up old houses, and the Horizon Day Camp was where I learned how to swim.
No?
Because it was a lady named Ann Bowman. And because my mother was involved in all these different organizations, I can't remember the name of the people that had this pond, this lake. So we would go there in the summertime, and Ann Bowman was a lifeguard. So she would teach us how to swim. And I guess the most important thing uh, about my mom at that time was that she was involved in something all the time. Uh, when she and a neighbor, they formed a brownie troop.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think Thelma Williams was involved in it. And later on, my mother worked, she was, I don't know if she was a leader, but she was involved with the Girl Scouts.
Well, I have an article here that says that she was the first African American. She organized the first African American Girl Scout troop in Fairfax County, and the first integrated Brownie troop, and that her efforts were written up in Reader's Digest. So it went beyond the information in the news, went beyond this community out into the public at large.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, my mom was a great influence, and my father he wasn't an out front, and my mother really wasn't an out front kind of person. She just believed that we should have every opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
be the best people we could be, and she worked hard. And my father was in the background. He just supported us and
Yes.
encouraged us. But my father never attended a football game because he didn't understand the game of football. I played Little League Baseball in Vienna now. He was really involved in that. But, my mother was so active in everything. And then she found time. I mean, we used to go blackberry picking. We go on nature hikes and flowers, get things out of the woods, and flowers out of the woods. And my mother was always busy, and she was working. She drove a school bus when I was in elementary school. She later on, her and Mrs. Scheidegger formed Dunkirk Employment Agency.
Wow.
And that was in Vienna. And
Mm-hmm.
they were like headhunters. They found jobs for people.
Good.
Uh, and that was back in the 50s. And I guess she did that for 4 or 5 years, maybe 3 or 4 years. I'm not sure how long it was. And uh, and in the community, she was always involved in. Since you weren't in this area, Luther Jackson was my older brother and sister. Excuse me. My older brother and sister went to Manassas High School initially. And so everybody in Fairfax County was bused out of Fairfax County to Prince William County to go to school. And then in 1955, through the efforts of Black parents and donating property and buying property in Murrayfield, once the property was obtained, then the county put the school on that property. And so I went there for a couple, 3 years. I went there 8th and 9th grade. And 10th grade, and then I went to Madison. But my mother was always involved. She knew everybody in Vienna, the mayors, everybody. So, and she was always active in things, and always promoting. Like when Jim Scott, who was the supervisor for our for Providence District. I mean, he was like a personal friend. And I went to school with Martha Panino, who was a supervisor. I went to school with her son at Madison. And so my mother had formed a lot of relationships and connections within the county. And a lot of these things I was involved in, as people say was just like mucilage. It wasn't something that I sought out. Mm-hmm. It's just some people you find yourself in a situation, you say, well, why not? So
I understand. Well, I know that still continuing with your mom, that she was a member of the Vienna Oakton Dunloring United Council of Church Women.
Right.
With the Fairfax County Fair Housing,
the
Fairfax County Democratic Committee, the Sutton Road Civic Association. She was a member of Union Baptist Church in Vienna, which is on Pleasant Street. Right. And she was a member of the Quilters Unlimited of America. Now, at the time that she was doing the quilting, there was a big quilt made that now is being hung in the Massey government office.
Yeah, in the government center,
in Fairfax.
Right.
So it's nice to have something lasting that you can go and look at yourself and say, my mom helped with this. This is part of what she did.
And I think she was a member of the Links too. I know they had a organization back then of Black ladies that I'm pretty sure she was a member of the Links at that time.
Probably was.
And she was involved in so many organizations. So when these things came up in my life, I mean, I couldn't say no. I didn't want to do this because she was kind of a pioneer and was always pushing for us to do better. So a lot of these things, like I always liked sports, but she was instrumental in integrating the schools, and it was interesting, and it was kind of troubling, but because when we integrated the schools, and then they say, well, you go to the closest school, we had friends that had white friends that had fought with us to integrate the schools. But when, for example, Louise Archer, when it was predominantly Black, and when they had to send white kids to a predominantly Black elementary school, they kind of balanced it out because they transferred some of the Black students out of the Black neighborhood over to Vienna Elementary. So that was kind of interesting that you found out.
And also to Flint Hill. I remember that somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Flint Hill. Right.
Flint Hill. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. It was Flint Hill. I forgot about Flint Hill. Yeah, they distributed us all over the place. And I don't want to call any names, but I mean, some of these folks were we considered family friends. My mother considered family friends, but then when it was time for their kids to go to a predominantly Black school, they weren't in favor of that.
I see. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting your mom back in the 1990s era when I was active in the NAACP, and we met at her house. So that might have been during the time you were a policeman,
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
say. Yes, around that time. And so I had a lot of respect for her because I knew that she cared a lot about the community and the equity
right,
of anyone, not just African American citizens, but anyone, to make sure that everyone was treated with fairness.
right.
So we thank you for not just what you have told today, but for your own legacy, your family's legacy. I mean, there are people here who have really been impacted. Their lives have been improved by both you, your mom, and so that kind of legacy lives on. It's not just a one-stop thing. It's something that goes from her generation to your generation to the generations that follow. And while we're talking about family, is there anything else that you want to mention? You mentioned you had a sister when you were in high school, that the two of you were the first at Madison. Which sister was that?
Phyllis Black. Yeah.
Okay.
And, we were talking about Vienna initially and the town. And my children, my daughters anyway, were involved in sports in the town of Vienna. And they were involved in softball. And I coached the softball team in Vienna, and I coached the team in football team at youth football in McLean. But I bring up Vienna because for the most part, the little town has been the town was, I don't know if you remember the Mayor Robinson. I don't know if you remember him. Yeah.
Yes, I do.
And he was a pretty progressive guy. And I kind of knew him personally because when I was at Madison, I met him then, and he always was very friendly. But Vienna, as I said, they always have been involved in it's been a very tight little community for the most part. Not that they didn't have problems like the rest of the United States, but it was a minimal. And at least we all had a chance to participate in different things. And to some extent, I coached my daughters because also to protect them.
Yes.
Because still it was discrimination. And I knew that I had to participate in coaching and that type of thing to protect my children. And the same thing was in the school system in Fairfax County. You had to participate you had to be a member of the PTA and do different things just to protect your children.
Absolutely.
And so, it's always been a fight, and it's still a fight. I'm too old now to do a whole lot of fighting, but, you hear him talk about, you hear people say, this is not the America we know. But this is the America Black people have known ever since the beginning of time, since we were here. And, for example, Hitler used the Jim Crow laws that were in existence in the US to oppress the Jews.
Really?
Yes, you look it up in history. He used that to oppress the Jews. So America has all this, what we are seeing now has always existed for Black people in America.
And I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
And if you don't go protect your children, even today, you always had to participate in in schools, in activities that your children participated in. And I understood my mother's position because you had to protect them because, nobody else was in the community was going to protect them if you didn't. And if you didn't show an interest in them and was there, they got just kicked aside like anybody else. So we're seeing, this is the real America that we're seeing now. It has existed for Black people ever since I've been living for 77 years. That's what it's been. And we've all had to live through it. And when my family physician asked me about COVID, and I was trying to get a COVID shot. And I told him, he said, and she asked me, say, well, do you have any underlying conditions? I said, yeah, I'm an old Black man that was raised in America. So, I'm stressed out. So I got hypertension. And I say, you have to, and I say, you have to ask Dr. Keller about any other of my underlying condition. But I mean, that's just a fact of life. And I'm hopeful that these young people now, they're not going to take the things that we had to put up with. We saw that this year and last year in the voting and we still see the underbelly and the discrimination in America, because I don't know if you recall, and I'm finishing, when H. Rap Brown spoke of the same thing, was talking about the conditions of when they were having the riots in Maryland and different places. They charged him with, they arrested him on a felony warrant for inciting a riot. Well, what did our former president just do? And nobody wanted to, they can't get a conviction on him. And so, what's changed? What's changed? We try to fight the good fight for our children and great grandchildren and grandchildren, but you get tired after a while. You would think America has changed, but Doc Rivers said it best. He said he don't know why African Americans love America, because America doesn't love us. He said it best, and that's the truth. But anyway.
Well, on that note, I can say that you are absolutely right, that what has gone on before is still happening. The good thing for our young people is that now they are learning more about their own past, the history.
Right.
And with that, it empowers them to speak out. If you notice, many of the people who are being very vocal against the injustice that we are seeing are young people, because they have decided it's time. It's time to step up and be proactive. So with that young blood coming up and the youth, we're hoping for a better tomorrow for all of our current people and the generation that will come after us.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because of the young people. They're just not taking this foolishness.
Well, Preston, I want to know if you have any closing remarks that you would like to add to this conversation. We've covered a lot of territory.
We have.
And it's been very, very good. And I have certainly enjoyed talking.
Well, I'm as I said, I'm optimistic that I may never see it, but I'm optimistic that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren will not have to face the same sort of prejudices and racism that we've had to face during the course of our lives. And for the most part, I've lived a fairly nice, good life, but there were obstacles at every level that should not have been there.
Yes.
And so I'm hoping that those obstacles will be removed, and I'm sure they will be in the course of time. But that's what they've been telling us, Sylvia, ever since I was a little kid. Just wait. And I ain't got no time to wait now. So, and it goes on and on. I can tell you some stories that it's like when they had I don't know if you remember Mr. Felton. You remember
Yes.
George Felton was a teacher?
And I was going to ask you about him. He was a principal at one time, wasn't he, at Madison?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was the principal, and Mr. Taylor. I don't know if you remember. Mr. Taylor was the principal, was the only principal at Luther Jackson High School.
Okay.
And then when Luther Jackson became intermediate school, he was the first, he was the principal at Madison. And Mr. Felton followed.
What was Mr. Taylor's first name? Do you remember?
I was trying to think of it. I have it around here somewhere, but I'll have to get back to you on that. But,
okay.
He was the first. He may have been the first Black principal in Fairfax County of a predominantly white high school anyway. And then Mr. Felton followed. And but after that, like I said, I'm trying to think of his name, and I know his name too. But anyway, his name was Taylor, and he was a little short guy with a big, deep voice. But he was the first principal at Madison, Black principal, maybe in Fairfax County High School.
Yes.
But Mr. Felton, I kind of grew up with Mr. Felton because when I was at Luther Jackson, he was a football coach, and we remained friends throughout his life.
That's nice.
Yeah, he was, and that was the difference between, say, going to the white high school and being at Luther Jackson. Luther Jackson was like a family. People looked out for you. Yes. And that was the biggest difference between Luther Jackson, me transferring to Madison. It was a hostile environment, whereas I had just left a family environment.
Yes, wow. Well, that was quite a transition for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was. And sometimes I look back on it and say, oh, well. But I had some close friends at Madison. And but we haven't, the only one that I've kept in touch with, I went back to a reunion, is Pete Grant. He still lives in Vienna, and we play football together. He's a good guy, but he's about the only one I've kept in touch with.
Yes. Well, after this conversation, we'll continue to think about things that we might have talked about. Memories, names will come back to your mind. Right. And yes, and that's the way life is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. But I have certainly enjoyed spending this time with you.
And I thank you.
And I hope we will get to meet in person sometime soon when this COVID is finished and we feel comfortable about visiting.
I think by the end of this year, we'll be back to, I didn't say normal. I don't want to go back to normal again, but we'll be back to doing some of the things that we enjoy doing, group meetings and having friends over and doing that type of thing.
Yes. Well, I'm sure we will. And I'll look forward to another opportunity for us to continue where we left off today.
Okay, Sylvia.
At some time in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you.